Hello everybody and welcome to Photography Post-Processing with Affinity Photo, Week 2, Developing and Post-Processing Raw Images. My name is Tom Sternad and thanks for joining us. This is Week 2, just a short 2-week masterclass overview, we'll call it, of Affinity Photo. And the goal here is we want to make sure that everyone is familiar and comfortable with Affinity Photo. So this is software that's available on our partner library computers, and these are our digital arts workstations, or iMacs, and it's also a low-cost app that you can have on your iPad, and it's also a low-cost desktop version that you can have on Mac OS and Windows OS as well. So that's why we've chosen it as a piece of software that can work to provide a tool for your post-processing of your photographs as you work on things. So just want to start off, thank all our partners in this project for making this happen and bringing this project together. So we have the Canada Council for the Arts and we have our library partners. So we have the Blue Mountains Public Library, we have the Collingwood Public Library, and the Wasaga Beach Public Library. So as I mentioned, it's really exciting now. We have digital arts iMac workstations that are available at all these library partners. You'll be able to book these as the libraries come to reopen, and by being able to rebook them, you'll be able to book them. You'll be able to use the Affinity Photo software directly on the computers. So if you have an older computer at home, don't worry, we have you covered. These iMacs are there for you. Now, in terms of what the software can do, just a little bit more on the Affinity Photo. So I'll just start here. Affinity Photo. So essentially, it's an alternative to Adobe Photoshop. So the low-cost one-time payment. Right now, it's about $35. It's 50% off, so it's $35, and you can get it for desktop. So it's Mac and Windows, and then you can also get it for iPads as an app. And so it has all the same features, and you can work directly on an iPad. So that's the great thing, is that I demoed that last week on the iPad, is that you can take photos on your iPad, and then you can work with them directly in Affinity Photo. And that's a really great tool to be able to use in that manner. It's, again, low cost, one-time payment, so it's not a monthly subscription. And if you want to just get it for yourself, right now is a great time. It is 50% off. And otherwise, if it's something you want to just look at, you can do a trial. It's no cost, same fully available applications. There's no limits to it, and there's a free trial offer. So you can try before you buy as well. And again, you can always use our digital arts iMac workstations at our library partners. So that's a really cool thing. So let's talk a little bit about, okay, so what is raw photography? And this term comes up, and and I wanted to look at defining this a bit today, as we are going to work with raw photographs. So last week, if you did join us last week, your digital ticket will have the links to week 1, the Vimeo archived videos there, so you can rewatch and see everything that we did. Last week, we looked at just taking the JPEG files, taking photos, generally the types of photos you get off of your phone or tablets, or if you're not shooting in a RAW mode on a digital photo camera, you get basically JPEG photos that have everything baked in. And then you can still do post-processing to improve it, but you can't do the same amount of post-processing or developing, what we're going to look at today, as you can with a raw photo file. So raw photography, it's the digital equivalent of a film negative, such as a 35mm still frame. So, originally when photographs and photography started, essentially, 35mm, it's not just a random term, but it refers to 35mm being a square part of film negative. So you're exposing 35mm like horizontally, like a square image of film. And then that gets exposed as a negative, it gets processed, and then from the processing you can make a positive print. So the idea is with the negative, it can store information, and it's not a positive yet. So the negative gives you more latitude, and it gives you more information that you can use to develop a positive image from. And that's the really key tool, is that it's a representation of that image, And in the digital world, it's even more so like that. So it's a representation of what that image is in real life that you took a picture of. And because it's a raw file, it provides really like a flat negative type digital image. And it's not exactly like a negative, but it's the same concepts of a negative. So that's the idea, is how did we come to this? And that's what we're going to look at today. So then it can be developed into a pixel-based pixel-based photography with image settings applied to it. So it becomes developed. Now, the raw files are very large, unlike the JPEG files. They're usually, five, I'm just looking here roughly. So camera raw will usually be about double or more. So I'm seeing about 11, 12 megs for JPEG, and then 28 megs for one, for example. Another one here is 25 megs, the raw, and the JPEG 7. So, it varies because it's not an exact compressed file. And that's another thing. So it works more as an uncompressed file, a huge amount of data in that file, and it's again not what's called baked in. So it doesn't have that information. So raw files are large, and unlike the JPEG or other photographic files, the color information is not baked in. So that means it can change because we're working with a negative type raw file. But it needs to be developed or processed. So you can't just take that raw image file and just open it up. It has to be opened up in some sort of software that can process it or develop it prior to then doing additional post-processing. So again, think of this idea is very similar to if you shot film in a camera, you can process, you then need to process the film and print it. You can't just see it right away. So that's the same idea. The camera raw files are files that need to be opened, developed, and then you can see it and work on it. But the JPEG file, you can just open right away and click it in any kind of computer. It just opens up in some sort of a media browser or file type window, right? So that's what happens there. So, let's talk a little bit about the history of photography. So developing film. So photography comes from a photochemical background, and 35 millimeter film rolls, they're really the standard out there. So that's what most people were using. So SLR photography, now we're into DSLR, digital single lens reflex. So SLR photography, single lens reflex cameras, which basically means you are seeing through the negative. So there's a mirror, and it is showing you exactly what the lens sees into the viewfinder. So that's that single lens view. And then the mirror opens and exposes the film and closes back down. So you're seeing through the mirror, and then the film is exposed through the lens. So that's what a single lens reflex. We'll hear that a lot. Now, other cameras, like some point and shoot and things like that, they started doing their own viewfinder, and we'll see that on like small ones. So I'm trying to think of a good example, like a Polaroid camera. There's a lens that's exposing the film, but there's also a lens or a viewfinder that you're seeing, and it's not the same. So you're not seeing through the same lens. So it's not a single lens reflex. It becomes a dual lens, if you will. There's a viewfinder lens specifically, and there's a lens for the film. So what you're seeing is not exactly as what the final photo will be. So there's an offset and there's like a parallax, and it gets all very complicated, but it's different. So single lens reflex has been kind of the go-to, and this is what we offer in our digital arts photography cameras through all our library partners. You can access a Canon 6D digital single lens reflex camera. So what you see through the lens is exactly what the camera's sensor sees and what the raw image will be like. So what you see is accurate to what you're getting into the camera. So the old way, cameras loaded a roll of 35 millimeter film, and then you would expose one photo at a time, and the film would advance to the next frame. There's sprocket hold, it advances to the next one. You take another picture, it advances. Then you'd have 24 or 36 exposures per a roll. The roll gets developed with the chemical process. And you can see here, there's hanging rolls of film, and that's what it would look like. And many of us are probably familiar with that, but just kind of going back to where we started with these concepts. So developing film, the process. So you have the photographic film. There's a plastic base plus gelatin emulsion. It's an empty frame. Then you expose it. So this is all done inside the camera. So there's light goes through the lens. It exposes this empty gelatin, mixture of film, and then it goes into a developer bath. So there's a mixture of components, metallic silver exposed to light, and it starts to develop what is on that film. So if you have a roll, you can't see what's on it as it's just exposed by the camera until you get into the developer bath. Then there's a stop bath. It stops the developer action, so it doesn't develop too much. It has to be developed to the right timing. And then there's a fixer bath, ammonium, and it removes the silver halide portions. And it is actually silver, and that gets recycled, and it gets reused, and it gets made into silver. So it's sold, and then the silver over the course of a year helps to usually pay for all these chemicals being used in development. So that's kind of that use there. Then it gets washed. So you remove the fixer and the hard water marks, and then in a dust-free environment, it gets dried. And then you have your fully piece of negative that you can handle in your hands. And that's the negative. So that's the whole idea. So now you take a picture, you take a picture and you get a RAW and you get a JPEG. You can set it up for both. And you have a negative and you have like a positive print like right away, instant. So before, you can see it was a long process, and now we're working instantly. So that's the key to remember, is that you have to always make sure that you set your camera to shoot in a RAW mode as well, right? So that's a real integral part of the RAW process. Okay, so then we go from negative to positive, and we're going to look at that, how when we import these RAW files, different ones, we'll look at, I did some different exposures, kind of overexposed, underexposed. We'll look at the nuances of when it's brought in and what we can do with it. So image B in this is the color negative, and you can see the color negative has all the like red, green, blue, or images, and so it's negative, right? So it's totally reversed image. So the blue sky is red, the white clouds are black, right? So truly reversed negative of a negative of the positive. And then image A is the positive print of it, the trees, the leaves, and you can get an idea of kind of the representations of that. Now, below D is a black and white negative, the same idea, and then it's printed to a positive image in C, right? So the white bright sky is totally black, and the dark black tree is totally white. So there you can really see it in a much more simpler representation, black and white reversed into a positive. Right? So that's what we're getting to. So this is the same concept. Our raw images, they don't come in totally looking like negative, but it's the same idea that we're working with this negative image that can then be made into a positive with color information. And in that process, we decide what that color information is, what the look is in developing it. So we become our own developers. And that's the really exciting part of going from raw to a developed picture. So how we do this, and I'm going to demo this. So we use the develop persona. So in Affinity Photo, we just open the camera raw file. In this case, I'm using a Canon, so it's a CR, camera raw. It's a CR2 file in this case. And then in Affinity Photo, it automatically goes into the develop persona. So this becomes like a develop machine or developing machine, like you would have had in photo stores in the past, taking the negative and then scanning the negative, deciding what it should look like, choosing colors, contrast, exposure, is it underexposed, overexposed, fixing the exposure as best as possible, and then printing. And that's called, then we develop, right? So we're kind of, it brings it back to the idea of developing negative, develop persona. So then think of the set of tools as that printing machine where you took the negative and you could print a positive photo. And in this, we create a base look. And it can even be the final look. You don't even have to go beyond that. You might feel comfortable enough in this develop that you can just develop it. And then from there, it's going to create a pixel-based final image that can be further post-processed using the same techniques that we did last week in the week 1 session. So you're basically taking this camera raw, choosing what it's going to look like in a development mode, and then it's creating a pixel-based image that can be further worked on in Affinity Photo, and then you can export it into, as a Photoshop file, PDF file, JPEG, and whatever you wish to. So that's kind of the idea of the steps that we need to do in order to make that happen. And so let's jump right into the process here. So I put all my photos in. Now I used basically 2 things. So I did a double type of work. So I would make a JPEG and I also make the camera raw. So you can see right here, if I zoom in, we got the JPEG and we got a camera raw right there. 2 different types of photos. Right, you can see the sizing, like the JPEG in this case is 5.6 megabytes, and then the camera raw is 22. So significantly larger. So again, I can open up the JPEGs, and voila, we just see them like that. Different JPEGs, you can see this is overexposed. So we're gonna see what we can do with it. And again, it's a little bit of an experiment. I just took a whole bunch of different photos, different exposures. And we want to look at how we can develop these and what we can do with them to make them, work in a manner that we can develop them in Affinity. Okay, so that's all we need. So that's our first thing. So I just have those all loaded into a folder. So that's the first step. You would want to take your camera, your SD card, offload the footage. You can shoot just camera raw mode. I recommend, if your cameras can easily do it with SD cards now, is to do the raw plus JPEG combo. So you have both. And that way you already have kind of a quick preview JPEG you can see. And then you also have the camera raw that you can then work with in something like Affinity. Okay, so I have Affinity open, and then our next step, so I have Affinity open right here. And we talked about the persona tabs. They're right up here. And I can't open these right now because I don't have anything that can work in that. But what's going to happen is when I go to File, I'm going to go to Open, and I'm going to just find one of these. So right now I can open a JPEG or I can open the camera raw. So for example, let's do that where let's just open up a JPEG, right? And it opens the photo up like that. So we're already kind of familiar with that. It tells me I'm using a Canon Rebel T31. It gives me the lens information. And it gives me the sizes, about 5200 by 3456. And you can see right here, it's a pixel layer. And then we can do all the work that we did last week, which is we can go to the adjustments, we can go to HSL, we can desaturate, right? So we can take all the color out, we can oversaturate it, and so on and so forth, right? So that's great. So those, and then all our layers, we have the adjustment layers, and just a little quick review. So that's how that looks. So now let's open the same one up. Hopefully I can just remember which one it was here. And I'm going to open up the camera raw now. So it's the same image, 6509. And I'm going to double click on that. And this is the difference now. So now we have a raw image. You can see that's the same one, right? And then when I'm done, I'm going to go up here and hit develop, right? But right now I haven't done anything with it. And this is the beauty. So we can play with everything we want here. So it's telling me it's raw, gives me all the information, ISO 100, f-stop of 5, a 40 millimeter lens, 1/60th shutter. So it gives me all that metadata, which is great information. But now what I can do, versus the past one, the past image. So we have, here's this image, right? So let's just have a look. That's the JPEG, right? With a adjustment layer, a little bit in it. And now here's the raw. See, so it's a bit darker, it's flatter, right? It's already pre-processing a little bit. But now I have all these controls. So I can now play with the exposure. I can make it darker. I can increase the exposure. But you can see that the image is holding up rather nicely. Now I can play with the black point and say, I want to make it darker. I want to make that the darks brighter. I can play with my overall brightness. And what's great is we have all of this information right here in this histogram. So it's telling me like where the red, green, and blue is, and how there's a kind of too much red darkness and too much blue in the brightness. And so we can play around with those, right? We can then play with the exposure. So I can go really dark on the exposure. I can go a lot brighter on the exposure. Then we can play with the overall contrast. Make more contrast, more contrasty. We can take some saturation out if we want to. We can add a little bit of vibrance. So this is all done in the raw mode. So I have way more flexibility. I can do a lot more stuff. Let's go into white balance. So I can now go into the temperature. So I can shift it and make it into daylight balance, because I actually shot this as on purpose as tungsten. So you can see right away how quickly I'm fixing it from tungsten balanced daylight photography, which is incorrect. And I took the same image and I'm all of a sudden I'm making it into correct white balance, which is the 5600. Right? We can also play with the tinting of it. So if you want to go a little bit more like natural like that. Look what a big difference that already is. Just from this one that's tungsten, the white balance is incorrect, and this one that's daylight and working in that manner. And look how we can make it a lot brighter. So we can really play with what we're doing with our image. And then we can play with shadows and highlights. So we can make our shadows darker. We can make our highlights less bright. See, we can bring all those highlights down. What a big difference again. So all those kind of blown out highlights in the raw mode, I can get rid of them. Right, so it's looking quite nice. So this is all working on it beforehand, and then we can also do different profiles. So we can play with profiles of what we want it to look like. So the different like it would be like a lookup table kind of thing, like a LUT. Right, so that's sRGB, and we can go to different other types of ones as well. So once we're ready, we can then go just simply to develop. And now it developed it, and now we're in this pixel layer. So I can no longer go back and work on that, right? But remember, this image is just in Affinity Photo, so hasn't been destroyed. I can open it up again, but this is just opening a file up. So now I have an Affinity Photo, and my next step would be, if I like where this is going, then you'd want to save this. So I'd save as, and I can call this. We're going to save this basically as a Affinity project. So save document as, and now it's an Affinity document. What does that look like? So it becomes an AF photo. See, that's it right here. Now it's huge, 162 megabytes, because that's what the pixel-based version is of that raw photo. So you can see how great that is. I'm working in this huge file essentially with something that came on a small SD card at 27 or 28 megs, and now it's 162 megs. And there's a lot of detail in it. So if we're like zooming in here, you can see before it kind of breaks apart the pixels. And then I'm just hitting Option to get out. But yeah, that's what we can work on, right? So it looks it's pretty decent, like the amount of information that's in here. Let's just look at this tree here. So I'm handheld, so it's a little bit blurry, but again, it's pretty cool amount of information for a small photo essentially that I took. Okay, so now let's look at some different scenarios. That one was, the exposure wasn't that crazy, like from here to here, pretty decent. But look at the difference. So we went from tungsten to daylight, proper daylight, and a much nicer looking image that looks pretty accurate and proper to what we're trying to do. Okay, so I'm gonna just close this one off. We don't need that. I'm gonna not save that one. Keep this other one going. Okay, so now let's open another set that's a little bit more harsh in terms of, so I'm gonna open this one up. Look at this, it's totally blown out. So that's our JPEG. Now let's open up the same one, Camera Raw. And it's gonna automatically, again, we're in the develop persona. Right up here, you'll see that we went to the develop persona. And I find it pretty intuitive so far, like in terms of working with this and seeing what can be done. So again, so here's this one to this one. Not that different yet. And let's just see what we can do in terms of getting this correct. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna start with the white balance, get it to 5600 right away. So we're in the right zone of the greens and so on. Let's look at the exposure. So we can quickly get our exposure like that. Let's look at our shadows and highlights. Can I bring these highlights down so they're not so blown out? And yeah, I'm able to do quite a good amount of work, and then do out my shadows really dark. I can bring them up. Where do we want that kind of tint of it? So you can see it's blown out, but we can make it even a little bit more blown out in a way, but we can then adjust so that our trees look a little bit better with the black point and the brightness. I want a little bit more contrast. Clarity is kind of a sharpness indicator. So we can see those like leaves that are kind of getting blown out there a bit. Right, so we can, from that really blown out to a little bit less blown out. So that's helped it. But look at that, like totally, and we're getting some of that image, the image property back, if you will, into it. Now it's a little bit maybe too warm. Let me just take that balance down a little bit, or white balance. So look at that, from there to there, and we can definitely see these leaves are not as, there's more detail in it. And again, the image is pretty blown out, but we've managed to save it quite a bit in this raw mode where we can actually see the leaves, and here where we can't, where it's just totally blown out. Yeah, we can also play with it that we want it, really overexposed. We can make it like really dark, right? So that exposure point's a really cool factor in this. Vibrance, maybe the amount of color, if you will, and then you see this, the tinting itself. So that's like definitely looking a lot nicer. So from here to we definitely have more of an interesting look to it. I think we kind of want that sky in that area there a bit, so that it looks like that. Cool. So then we can go further from there. So let's just hit. So if we go develop, hit develop. And again, we have our image, and again a before and after. So totally overexposed. And you can see here we're getting some of the leaf details back. But a really good point again that you want to ensure that your images aren't that overexposed if you want to have all those details, right? So we'll look at what that means. Okay, so let's go to, I'm going to open up another set. So here now it's kind of the opposite, where we're a little bit darker, a little bit underexposed. So that's the JPEG, 6512. And I'm going to do the same one in the camera raw. And there it is in the camera raw. Okay, so you can see it's, again, not too different. We got that going right there. But now we should be able to play with our exposure and, play with what we see and how we see it. You can see it, we can keep a lot more of the details. And I'm going to go to our white balance. We're going to get to the 5600, the daylight balance, like so. Shadows and highlights. See, we can make that sky really bright. We can also just bring it down a touch. But that's looking pretty nice. I think somewhere around there is that's a pretty cool looking image right there where we're at, and so here again, totally wrong. It looks so dark, and here we go. We're already in this kind of nice bright mode. Maybe I'll just bring it down a touch like that. So here's a really good example of why it's great to underexpose, because you can really fix it in the post-processing. So if we're underexposed, right, versus the overexposure is a lot harder to fix, right? So it's pretty messy compared to, look at how much nicer that is when we're underexposed, so really dark to this, right? So then from there I'll go, okay, let's develop. It's going to create that pixel-based mode, a pixel-based image. Okay, and then we can start go into like these adjustment layers. So if I would go to like a curve, let's say, let's go to a curve. And here's where we can start to kind of shape it into, that kind of getting the sky a bit brighter or not, right? And playing with that. But that's already pretty cool, right? So, we're getting better and better. So again, from there to, look at that, right? So what an amazing thing we can do from darkness to that. And then again, we can play with shadows and highlights here. We can say, okay, let's get our highlights down a bit more. You want our shadows up, or maybe you want the shadows a little bit darker. That's nice. Brightness, contrast. And we want really more of a contrasty image, less of a contrasty image, right? So that's cool. We're not going to do recolor. We can totally go to just black and white if we want to. And what other images here? We can go to play with our exposure. Do you want up? You can see 2 stops right away, back to default, so we won't do anything. And then we can go to Selective Color. We can play with, specific colors within the zone. So we can say, okay, the blues. We can make the blues more blue, less blue, play with that. We can get rid of that. Then we can do color balance. Let's look at there. We can, play with the midtones. You want the midtones a little bit bluer, a bit warmer. Highlights. Let's say, do we want the highlights to see? We can get a little bit more of a kind of blue sky in there. Looks pretty cool. And then maybe the midtones, we can go a little bit warmer. And then we'll go to the shadows and say, let's make those really kind of warm and red. And that's really cool. So look what we're able to do. So again, from something really dark, we're able to recolor it into quite a beautiful sky still. We have all the nice leaf details and imagery, and yeah, it's a pretty cool idea of what we were able to do. And this may be on the curve side, making it just a bit darker in the highlights. That's kind of how I like it. That's right there. It's really capturing that kind of summer sky, or I guess we're still in the spring sky. But so from there to there. So again, that's the overexposed, and from there to there, working really nice. Okay, so now let's get one more here. I have let's go to something maybe a little bit more extreme. 617. See what this one looks like. Okay, so here's again a JPEG 6517. Again, a little bit darker. And then I'm going to open up the correlated camera raw. Right, so there's our camera raw. So again, here's just the JPEG. Here's the camera raw. Go to white balance. Now we're getting pretty familiar with this and faster with this. So I'm just, again, get to the 5600, the right area there. Let's get our exposure up. Look how bright we can make this right away. So again, you can see how great underexposure is. It always helps to, play with getting these things to look nicer and nicer. We want that really nice kind of saturation look. Let's make the shadows a bit darker. Highlights a bit higher. So look at this. So from the JPEG to already just that image looks really cool. I'm liking where that's going. Again, you can see how we're starting to overexpose, and we want it just in the nice spot, probably somewhere around there. And I'm going to say, yes, let's develop that. And then just like we're talking about earlier here, we can, play with the all these adjustment layers. So I was like a little bit of this kind of S-curve idea, bringing the darks a little bit more of a contrast, making those midtones pop a little bit more. Maybe we, do increased contrast. We can do a little bit more of a contrasty image. Do we make it a bit brighter too? If you want to desaturate, I'm going to get rid of that one. There's further white balancing here. Huge saturation and luminosity, so I can do overall shifts in these things, which is always kind of fun. Make our red flowers kind of purple, right? So all of a sudden we're into this kind of thing, right? So a huge shift. Make them blue. It's a lot of fun. So you can see it's really, taking those additional elements of once we're pixel based, right? What do our layers look like? So here's all our adjustment layers. We can just turn those off, back to our original developed raw file, like so. So that's really the essence. And then we're saving it. So for example, again, I'll save as, and I'm just going to call it Affinity Photo Post Process. So I know that's what's happening. It's going to save the file, and then we're ready to go. And then, so from there, once we're happy with that, we can continue these adjustment layers, the curves. We can, select different areas. We have, there's like a selection brush tool. So, you can kind of brush around what you want to do. There's the magic wand tool. So you can, kind of pick different areas. Let's go back to the background here. See, like it'll pick different spots. So then we could go to, add a pixel layer, and we can, if we wanted to, we can, let's say, copy, paste it into there. We got just that that zone there. I know it's really hard to see. So now what I can do is this one alone, we could go to an adjustment layer, and I can go here, and we can do different things just to that specific layer. Turn that off. Let's do that one more time. So now we're doing it to everything, just to give you kind of the difference there. Okay, and we're gonna just play with that zone on its own. So just going extreme here. So let's just have a look at that. So this is just playing with the pixels on their own there. Right. So selecting specific ones, playing with those specific ones, and so on. So a lot of great tools that we can keep adding to make different things happen. And yeah, exactly, these total extremes going to like blues and so on. So yeah, so that's again, we're working with the background. So again, it's no longer the raw, right? We've post-processed it. We can play with these different tools. So we can like lasso around, say, okay, we want to just work with that. And then we want to do something, an adjustment on that spot. So we can just make that part like so. Right, and that just becomes that zone. So that's how we can individually like go to different spots and figure it out. So there's all these great tools within here, like the lasso and the eyedroppers. We can figure out, okay, this green color here, and let's create like another pixel layer. Then we can go to things like a paintbrush, and we can start painting with. Let's get into that green. So if we want to paint more green around, right? I'm just doing it. I'm not doing this in a great way, but if we needed to like add a little green here or there, right? And that's all in that additional pixel layer, so I can just turn it on or off, right? So that's how we can do further adjustments and continue post-processing what we want to work on here. There's a blur tool. We have a clone brush tool, so that can be. I take that. Command plus click to, okay, so option, I'm going to hit on that, and then I'm going to, create a cloned zone. Let's actually create another layer here. So I'm going to hit that, option, click, and then let's draw. You can see that we're recreating the same flower in another zone. Right, so that lets us quickly do that kind of stuff. You can add extra flowers, right? So in clone tools, so tons and tons of features. So once we've developed it, we bring it in. We're able to do all those adjustment layers, use all the different tools, and continue working in this post-processing. So, there's kind of that multi-layer thing. So we're really working with we can just work with JPEGs, work with it in the Affinity Photo as we did in the first week's process, all the basic adjustments, all the adjustment layers, adding them, taking them on or off, and they're all there. So what's great is that you're not stuck with anything. You can turn all these adjustments on or off. And then what we did this week, we took raw photos, comparing them to the JPEGs. The raw photos, we can develop them post-process, but we're developing that raw negative, changing color temperature, changing exposure, getting it to look the way we want to. And then we say develop. Then it becomes this pixel layer, and then we're back to the same ideas of adding additional tools and post-processing techniques to make it work and look in a certain way. So that's the essence here. So you can do that, the adjustments with the regular JPEG photos, or we can work with RAW, develop them, and then you're back into the same world of pixel-based work as well. So that's how we can do everything in Affinity Photo. And I hope that was a great little overview. So again, from here to here, you can see we've added the extra flower, and then like from this one to this one, just what we can do. So something that's, again, I always say, if you underexpose, even a stop or two, you can definitely get it looking spectacular in the raw file, going out and developing it in Affinity Photo and working from there. And again, here's the flower, post-process that way. And here's the other sky that, I'm not as happy with. And this was the trees that were blue. But you can see the overexposed, it's really hard to fix versus the underexposed. Looks perfect. So that's a great thing to remember again. Underexposed, you can fix it very easily, to a degree, a few stops underexposed. So yeah, let's, if you have any questions, just want to put up my email here, tom@tbmcs.ca. Feel free to, to send me questions and we can talk more about things. Now, I have a question here. People are asking, for getting a raw file. So I can send this out afterwards to the participants. I can send a CR2 file, the one that we did here, the 65, 12, and 17. I'll send those out by email, or probably just like a Google Drive link, and you can get those. Happy to do that, and then you can practice doing that. If you also want to practice the whole process of taking the photo and working on it in Affinity, I highly recommend that you can just go to one of our library partners, take out the Canon 6D camera, shoot in the RAW mode, and then try it out on your own. And that way you can really get familiar with the process of taking the photos and then doing the post-processing as well. So yeah, that's it. Really want to thank everyone for joining us. A great session. Next week, I'm going to be flipping over into, it's a little bit different than photography, but we're going to be looking at Fusion, the After Effects type software, and we'll be looking at doing some more photo work in there as well. So if you're kind of interested in manipulating photos, we're going to look at that in Fusion a little bit more, and also just some of the some compositing type things, green screen work as well that could apply to photography. So it's a video based like After Effects type thing, but you can easily work on on an image as well. There's nothing to say you couldn't do that as well. So that's coming up next. And again, check out our website, tbmcs.ca, for upcoming workshops and webinars. And I hope to see you in future workshops. Send me an email if you have questions. And thanks again for joining us. And I hope that was a great informative session. All the best, and talk to you guys soon. Take care.